Hey YouTube, PD2 Finger back with the final installation video on building this here pedal, which is a PCB that I purchased from a company called Pedal PCB. This here is a clone of the Boss FC2. It's called the Hyped Fuzz. Now, this is an older version, and I was gifted this PCB, and the PCB that I got is an old out of production unit. So the documentation that was online was pretty much correct, but there was some changes, like the switching for the modes used a different kind of switch. It used a switch that had 6 terminal connections rather than 3. Also, I had soldered the potentiometer wires in upside down, and they were operating inverse. They were, when you would go to turn something up, you would have to turn it right to left, which is opposite. So basically what happened was I reached out and someone hooked me up. I didn't read the email I got from the guy, Pedal PCB company. I read the email from Tone Electronics, which was the guy who gifted me the PCB, and he let me know, oh, sure enough, the owner had provided the old PDF. So I went ahead and took a look at that, and what I noticed was, number one, the switch was wrong. The switch that I installed was an on, off, on, SPDT, and what it called for was an on/on. Now, I don't have that in stock. I would have to order that one, and I left it in there. So now what you get is when it's in the middle position, it's muted. So it acts as a kill switch. And the person that gets this pedal is just going to have to deal with that, which isn't really a big deal. More than likely, they will settle in leaving this on one of the settings, and that will be that. When reading the documentation, it alerted me that C17, capacitor number 17, which is this electrolytic here, is a 1UF, that the polarity on that needed to be flipped, meaning there was an error, not my error, but there was an error when they assembled the PCB. So I went ahead and, we got a flying transistor. I went ahead and removed all of the pots and the one electrolytic capacitor, which is a 1 microfarad, and we flipped all of those around. They were 360, installed literally upside down. Now, when it comes to desoldering stuff, you don't really, it's not recommended. These, especially with PCBs. Now, they vary in quality. This is a pretty good PCB. I did remove some traces. That's another episode. You can see how I patched those up by using the continuity test on my multimeter. So as we saw these transistors falling out here, one of the things you can do, a socket of the transistors, is put a little bit of solder on there. Now, that's one thing I do need to address, is I have the incorrect transistors. I had ordered BC550 transistor, and I had 6 of those here because Tata does not sell. Tata is the company I buy my electronic components from. Tata doesn't sell BC549s. They sell BC550s. It's the same transistor with a slightly different range of operational voltage. Now, that doesn't apply to me. They'll both work just the same. So I installed the 550s, and then when I was looking on eBay, I saw they have a bag of 100 BC549Cs. These transistors that this called for I think it was $1 or $2. It was like $2 for 100 transistors. And I like having a massive collection of transistors, IC chips, resistors, capacitors, all that stuff. And I know a good deal when I see one. So I went ahead and ordered one of those. And most oftentimes, other people that I've spoken to and been friends with, they go, you didn't need to do that. And it's like, the way my mind works is, I did need to do that. which it's not out of ignorance. It's not that I thought, oh, I put a 550 in there. It's different. I know from testing stuff that it doesn't make a difference. Okay, I'm experienced enough at playing around with these circuits to know what really will affect the tone. And the type of transistor, the type of chip is not as much as the value of a capacitor or resistor. That being said, it all does kind of matter, some more than others, and in the case of these BC 550s, they're identical. But I think probably when they come in, because this is going to somebody else, because I know this will probably get resold in somebody else's hands, I'm just going to go ahead and put the proper transistor in there just because of my mental illness. Now, in buttoning this thing up, it went together really nicely. This is a 3mm LED, and I used a excess wire so that when the lid is attached, it's going to press down on that, which is going to put forward pressure to keep the LED in place, because these LEDs sockets do not generally fit very well. It seems the plastic nub holder that they're provided is a little bit small in diameter. So it kind of wiggles around and they can come out. Now you could very well just put some dum-dum. I've got some dum-dum here. This is some stuff called Bishop tape. It's just black, an insulative tape. And what I'll do is I'll use this hobby knife to apply this in here on the side, and that should really kind of grab that. And now it's got, you can see the Bishop tape on one side of the LED if you really look in there. So yes, I don't want to talk real loud, I'm right by the mic. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was the stop switch. So for wiring this, there's a bridge going around here between 9 and 6, and then from 7 to 1 there's a bridge, and that doesn't have any insulation on it, on that jumper. Not a bridge, what am I talking about? But this layout here, I typically how I do this is I will apply a small amount of the flux. These are the proper eyelet types. If you have the type where it's just a pin that goes in a PCB, it's good to have both of these. So if you have a pedal that's on Vero and you use a breakout board for your wiring, you would want to use a switch with the pins. But then when you're using a PCB that just has an allotment of doing your own wiring, and like the LED is elsewhere, it's nice to have these eyelets. And then you can just trim the wires exactly as long as they need be, pop them in there, apply. First thing I do is I apply flux to all of the eyelets. That's the first thing that I do. And then I tin these wires and pop them in there, and then come in with the iron and use a little bit of additional solder. Now the last part of this job is wiring in the is this even going to work? Is it going to all fit? It may require that I get creative. Yeah, I'm going to have to get a little creative. Oh no, if I put these in sideways, you can see these are the jacks and they don't really fit. They will fit if they go in sideways, they will fit. So I have to make sure, you can, a lot of times you could go in with a hobby knife and whittle down the offending area, whatever's bumping in to, like, you know, there's this side post for the screws. You can just whittle away and remove some of the, you can, I've had to, actually when they've been too close to the, too high for the lid, I've actually taken the lids and marked it off a little section of that lid and then filed that out so it can pop in with an offending way too high type of 1/4-inch jack. So this will be probably the last thing that I'm going to be doing for this pedal is installing the input, the 1/4" input and output, and this one here is going to be on the bottom. So I'm going to have to wire that later, and I am going to need some wire at this point, which I don't have out here. This is a second day build. Now I forfeited my lock washer on the happy switch here, simply because I got all 4 of these holding it in. Most oftentimes I will use a small amount of what's called Loctite, and I will apply that to all of this hardware so it just doesn't come off. I don't do it to the pedal screws because, you know, I like to take a look in there and admire my handiwork or lack of it. We do have a washer. I put these washers on the outside. These are the cheap plastic jacks that I get. And really, other than that, I will note in here, what was I doing? I was fixing something. I came in with the iron and burnt the heck out of one of these film box capacitor. Yeah, and that's a signature move that I do. Oftentimes you'll see that in my pedals, and I gotta really stop doing that. As far as removing the potentiometers, that was you lay. I've got a new tip, which is a real fine tip, real narrow. So I would go in and apply the iron to the area, one of the legs. You cock this down, which creates a vacuum, and once it would melt, I would come in over the top and then fire this off. And this, what it does, it pulls up, creates a vacuum, and sucks all that excess solder. So you go through on each one of the pins, like you come in and you lay your soldering iron in here at the base to melt that, and then the vacuum comes in over the top. So it's a two-handed deal. It's nice if you got a buddy, have somebody hold the PCB for you. Make sure they come in at an angle that's not obtrusive. It's not going to get in the way. They're not going to get burned. Then you'll come in with the iron, like I said. You'll put it right in at the base and quickly come in and then fire out that thing, and that should remove all the solder. So once you've done all 3, then what you can do is flip it over, and then you'll have the 3 legs coming up, and I'll lay that iron across all 3 to heat those up real good, and it'll pop right out. And then you go back again, and what you do is you lay the iron on there, because the PCB has these holes, and now they're filled in with solder. You sucked most of that out of there, and then you clean up the ends that have little balls from when you removed it. But as far as the PCB, those holes will be full of solder. So then again, I'll lay this iron on there and kind of roll it on there, and as soon as I know that it's melted, I'll do another pop. Pull that solder sucker on there, get it right over, actually on it, and pop that out of there. And usually, for doing it on a triple, a pot has 3 lugs, usually I have to do that about 4 times. Like, I'll do the first one, I got it all. Do the second one, got it all. Do the third one, and it'll still be full. Like, you didn't quite get it right. And that's good, because you don't want to be heating these pads up. Every time you heat it up, it's not like a cat. It doesn't have 9 lives. It has like 4 or 5 lives. And at that 5th time that you're in there with that iron screwing around, you'll pull the iron up, and what you'll see is that trace, that metal, is stuck to the iron. It's no longer on the board. And then you have to start running jumper wires. You have to patch in what you screwed up. So that's never cool. And everybody has their own little method of removing solder. This is another tool for solder removal, which is the solder tape. There's still some good stuff on here. I find the secret with solder tape is to add my own little bit of flux to it, and then that it works really well at sucking up the solder. Now, once I had all of those popped out, yeah, they went in. What you want to do as far as installing this type of 90 panel mount potentiometer is you don't jam them all the way in. You jam them all the way in and then pull them out a little bit so they're in about the middle position. Because if they're jammed all the way in, they just don't sit right. They kind of angle up. And if you pop them back up about 1 millimeter, they'll sit really nice and level. And then as far as this pre-drilled out Tata chassis, this is great. You buy this, it's like $6.99 instead of $5.99. Yeah, maybe you could get a deal on this and pay $5 for this same chassis. I'd like to know where you're getting it. But with this, having it painted and have the holes already drilled in it, this is so much unbelievably the way to go. I can't even tell you. And then as far as the knobs, you could go in with a real fine paintbrush and a bottle of Testors flat black model paint, do a V, T, B, and G, or whatever you need to do. That's what I would recommend. And then I've got these blue knobs that are going to look pretty. Oh, look at that. We've got parts in here that we ended up not using. We've got a 5mm. So yeah, we'll end up, this is what's going to go on here when we're finished. So I'll be back in a few minutes and we'll demo this thing out for you. I do want to say I had already demoed this with the IC3. There's 3 integrated circuit chips. When I plugged in IC3, I plugged it in sloppily, and half of the prongs were not making any contact. And you could see that in the one video. They're just sitting off to the side. I'm demoing it. I'm like, there's a lot of noise, and that's, you know, when it's not in the chassis, it just makes noise, and that'll, once I button it up, that'll all me just lying out of my teeth. I didn't know. And once I actually installed the chip properly and the other half of that op-amp was functioning, I found that, oh gee, the bass control is a lot meatier now. Because that was the amp that was behind the section of the circuit that buffers out and powers the bass frequency control knob. So yeah, I'll be back in a few minutes and we'll give this thing a test on an amp and you can let me know what you think. This has been Building a Pedal in 30 years or less. I hope you enjoyed it. Special thanks to Ricardo from Portugal, and of course we can't forget our pal over at Pedal PCB. You can pan over to this yellow one. This is another one of his builds. This is the oh gee, I have 2 different integrated circuit chips. And when I pull those out, they're EPROMs, or do you say EPROM? It'll either be, depending on what chip you install, a clone of the Keeley 30MS, which is an automatic double tracking pedal, or the Daydream Kaleidoscope, or whatever you call it, which is a real cool filtered delay. So I'm no stranger to this guy's PCBs, and I got a Friedman. It's a BEOD. And then if you turn this trimmer, it's a Dirty Shirley. Those pedal circuits are very similar, so he built them both into one thing. So I'm going to be putting together that thing. I'm really excited about that. And I got some germanium builds on some like super expensive Sputnik 2, Spaceman Effects Sputnik 2, or Leica fuzz. I'm going to be doing those. And I'm going to do a diesel V4. So I got some dirt box stuff coming up, and maybe I'll do a little video stuff for that. But check out the demo coming next, and peace. All right.